Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we've got a video talking about Andrew Scheps Mix Bus processing, or 2-bus, or stereo bus, or whatever you want to call it. That bus where all of your audio tracks are routed through before they're printed or sent out. You're going to take a mix that sounds like this without the processing. And with the processing sounds like this. It will be louder. Basically taking it from what sounds like a well-balanced mix to an actual radio-ready mix. And that's all with mix bus processing. There are a couple rules you want to keep in mind about this. Rule number one is mix through these processors. Don't mix and then add them on at the end. It won't achieve the same result. You want your mixing decisions to be based upon the processing that's happening on this stereo bus. Rule number two is, even for Andrew, the order of processors or the actual processors themselves might change, but the principles that are being applied are pretty much the same all the time. So you can apply these principles even if you don't have the exact plugins that I'm using or he uses. So plugin number one in Andrew Scheps Mix Bus processing is the VCC from Slate Digital, and it features just two of the processors. The first one is the Custom Series Lift, which is a parallel EQ processor. And the second one is the Virtual Mix Bus, or sometimes the VCC, Virtual Console Collection, set on the Neve. And they do a couple of things. I'm going to bypass them one at a time. This one, for Silky, gives a little bit of a high lift to that top end. So here it is with it. And without it. Back in. Just a nice top end presence there. Now the virtual mix bus on the Neve setting really impacts the low end. So listen to the bass and the kick drum when I turn this on and off. It's a subtle change, but it really ties everything together. Processor number two is the Fairchild compressor, but not compressing at all. You can see the threshold set to 0. That means the compressor is not engaged. And this is just being used for the harmonic distortion of the modeled tubes and transformers on the inside. You've got the mix back at a little bit over 50%. Without it, sounds like this. And with. And I'll toggle it on and off as it plays. Again, it's subtle, but it just adds a little bit something that's really nice. The next processor is used all the time by Andrew. This is the Neve 33609 compressor. And the reason he uses this is because when he used to mix on his Neve console all the time, the Neve 2264 compressor was basically the left and right channels of this 33609. They sound a little bit different, he says, but they're basically the same compressor. So that's why he uses this in the box. It's always set for him to the 100 millisecond release time. He likes that setting a lot. The Auto 1 and Auto 2 do sound good as well, but this one really has a different character to it. You're at 1.5 to 1, very low ratio. You're pushing the gain up a little bit depending on how much gain reduction you're getting, but generally you want it to be below 4 dB of gain reduction. Here it is with the processor off first. Listen especially to the drums, the snare drum. You can really hear a difference. I'll start with it off, then I'll engage it. Just a really nice snap to the drums with that compressor. Next processor is Brainworks BX Digital V3, and this is doing a couple of things. The top section of this processor is a mid-sized processor. You've got the mono section over here with all the mid-signal things that are happening in both speakers. And you've got the right side over here, which is the stereo section, things that are happening in one speaker but not the other. most of your content's actually going to fall into the stereo section. You've got reverb, you've got your panned out guitars, stereo parts, keyboard parts, lots of stuff's going on the stereo section. And it's a small bit of processing here. It's going to be a shelf. This knob's all the way to the left. That's a shelf setting. At 8K, a 1.4 dB shelf. Again, sides only. And if you look down at the stereo section, you can see the shelf right here. That's not happening in the mono section. Second thing that's happening is a little bit of stereo enhancement here. The stereo width is pushed up to 141%, which seems like a lot, but actually doesn't sound too bad and works well in mono, which we'll check in a second, just for a little bit of stereo widening. The third and final item that he sometimes uses, that I'm actually using in this mix, but he doesn't always use, is the bass shift. You can see it in the mono section here. It's basically a resonant peak where you're pushing the bass frequencies up a little bit lower and then scooping out right above them. And that shifts the emphasis of the bass a little bit lower. Here it is with this processor on and off. I'll bypass as I play. While most of the other processing before was pretty subtle, this one's very noticeable, very obvious. It's a really nice addition. Now we'll check it in mono. I'll pop it on and off. You'll hear its mono compatibility, even with this widening, is just fine. So the mix doesn't fall apart in mono, so that's working just fine. The next processor is the good old Pultec, and this is basically a smiley face EQ. We're bumping almost 3 at 100 cycles or 100 hertz. This is not 3 dB, it just goes from 0 to 10. I'm not exactly sure how many dB it is, I'd have to check it, but it's almost 3. The other end, we've got a 10K boost just above 3. The bandwidth is really broad here, a little bit above 7. So the top end of the Pultec is actually a bell shape. But when you have it this broad, it's basically acting like a shelf, just like the low end is. So you've got boost in the bottom end at 100 hertz, really broad boost at the top end at 10K. And the effect of this is not having to use as much channel top end EQ. So rather than adding top end to snare, top end to guitars, top end to piano, or whatever other elements you have kind of have this already in place on your mix bus and don't need to EQ quite as heavily on each channel. I'll bypass this one on and off as it plays. The final processor in the chain is the Oxford limiter, and this is going to be set up with the attack at its very slowest, the release at its very fastest, soft knee up at 5.3 dB. Basically, that's going to be the most transparent limiting you can get out of this thing. The auto gain is off. The enhanced curve is basically a one fader version of the Oxford inflator, so it increases apparent loudness, which is really nice. So you push this up, you're going to get some volume boost out of it. Safe mode's on. Output trim is down just a little bit so don't get any red lights, no clipping. You can mess with the input gain if you want to as well. The auto comp button is on, and here's what it sounds like on and off. Now there will be a big difference in volume too. And if you take a look at the gain reduction meter, it's barely doing anything. So again, just catching those few peaks to help with clipping and bringing the mix up to a pretty competitive level. That's it. You've got your virtual mix rack with the custom series lift and the Neve emulation. You've got your Fairchild just for that transformer sound, the Neve 33609 for your bus compression, a little bit of stereo widening, some high shelf EQ on the sides, and a little bit of bass shift for this BX Digital V3, a smiley face EQ from the Pultec, and catching those peaks and bringing up the loudness with that Oxford limiter. And again, you can use whatever plugins you want, but those basic principles apply. Beef up the low end, beef up the top end, a little bit of stereo widening, some nice bus compression, and some saturation, some harmonic distortion. And again, that took us from here with all the processors off to here with all of them on. So I encourage you to try this on your next mix and see if it works out for you. It works for Andrew. It works for me a lot of the time, and I bet it will for you too. If you got some other ideas about what you'd like to put on your mix bus, I'd love to hear them. So write them down in the comment section down below. If you got any other questions or comments, leave them down there too. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.